going to roll things backwards. You know, if we see the spike and the hospitals start to get a build up, we're going to be, instead of at least staying where we are, we're going to be rolled back to 2 or phase 1 or something, and that's terrifying.
Well, we are live. Episode 14, Check the Gate. One-on-one with the Northeast Filmmakers Lab. And I have a couple of special guests with us today, which include lower left on my side, Reggie Harris, singer-songwriter, Bryan Cady, composer, educator, and actor-director Kevin Craig West. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
So I'd like to start with a beverage. I usually start with either some wine or some water. Does anybody need a beverage?
I'll take some water.
Yeah, I could use a glass of water.
Okay. Coming up. Let's see.
Oh, fancy water.
Oh, wow, nice.
Fancy, yeah.
Oh, let's see.
Very cool.
Here you go, Kev.
All right, thank you much.
You're welcome. Reg, what can I get for you?
I think I'll go water.
Water,
I
okay.
never drink enough.
You know, I just like to
especially that
start
thick
off
water.
because it's been such a journey to get through COVID. Here you go, Reg.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome. And how about you, Brian?
Yeah, water all around sounds good.
Okay, just a second.
Not that I want you drinking alone, Mike, but you know.
No, no, exactly. Here you go, Brian.
All right, perfect. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Gentlemen, okay, so I'm just gonna pour myself a little Josh wine
What
here.
time is it? Oh, 3:04. I guess you're clear.
It's 5 o'clock
somewhere, Reg. So,
It's good for the stomach, right?
yes, exactly. They say that it's very good for your dietary, all those things. So,
Yep.
Check the Gate is a weekly program. You know, we started at the beginning of COVID, early March, and this is our 14th episode, supported by the Capital Cinema Cultural Exchange, a charitable nonprofit empowering emerging filmmakers to complete and present their projects in a rapidly changing media landscape. And boy, has things changed in the last few weeks. And we do that through a lab process and discussion. So fortunately, we're supported by sponsors like Price Chopper, Market 32, Albany Wine and Dine, Festival for the Arts, Josh Seller Wines, joshsellers.com, Crew Me Up, Connect, Create, Collaborate, crewmeup.com, filmalbany.com, which is entering, we hope, phase 4 coming soon, yayflix.com out of Toronto, and our latest East to Western Productions, developing the romantic comedy, The Best Man's Privilege, written and directed by Andy Maycock, easttoweston.com. Next Thursday, our guest, Dr. Diane Killian, founding director, Work Collaboratively. Registration is now open at cinemaexchange.org. For those that don't know the term Check the Gate, I learned on a movie, Frozen River, on the teaser. I think Kevin, you may have been on there, and they did this thing called Check the Gate. We had to make sure there weren't any impurities in the lens, and it's a film term, and if there aren't any, then we get to move on. So with that, let's move on. I'd like to read a little intro about each of our guests. Kevin Craig West is an award-winning actor, filmmaker, proud member of SAG-AFTRA and AEA. When not on camera or stage, he enjoys producing, directing, writing, and coaching. He also enjoys sharing his talents as a teacher, artist, and has worked with many arts and education groups, including Theater for a New Audience, Only Make Believe, and Symphony Space. Kevin is the owner of a production company, Mo Better Films, an advisory board member of Wham Theater, as well as Lake Placid Film Forum, former president of Upstate Independence, and has served as assistant director of the Film Columbia Festival. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
And
thank you.
you are where? You are in Manhattan now?
I am in Manhattan right now. Yes.
How has COVID affected you as an actor, writer, director?
Well, its immediate impact on me was felt while I was in production. I was doing a play in Boston, in Cambridge, that had to come to a screeching halt with 2 days notice. And yeah, so everything shut down, and I came back into New York March 15th, and the 17th, everything here was shut down. And it's been that way, you know. New York, Manhattan was or New York City was the epicenter of it. So, you know, it was, yeah, it was quite horrible. The silence at night, nothing but sirens from all of the ambulances. It was, yeah, it was like a horror film. But now it's magically all over, apparently, because everyone's back out as though something has changed, and nothing has changed. So, yeah, it's been, you know, everything, as far as work, everything shut down. Well, everything had become, you know, Zoom.
Right.
I've had some Zoom acting gigs. I've had some Zoom teaching gigs. I've taken Zoom classes. So it's, I'm looking forward to no longer Zooming.
It gets a little dizzying,
Yeah.
you know, Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. But I do find in one way, we're able to access people that we might otherwise not be able to access, or they're showing up
That's
on
true.
Zoom.
Mm.
But certainly there's some limitations, and I hope we can talk about that, as I know all of you guys are into education around the arts.
Mm.
Bryan, you've been a music educator with over 22 years experience in public schools, and the last 17 of them in urban education. In addition, you own the Gillian Music Academy, Scotia Music Academy, which has helped over 400 students a week work towards achieving their musical goals. You've written music for several independent films, including Uncivil Liberties. How have you been impacted by COVID?
Left, right, up, down, sideways, you name it.
Right.
Yeah, in every aspect of my varied life. You know, as a public school teacher, you know, that's a whole nother set of challenges in teaching kids online. You know, I teach elementary school band primarily to kids in grades 3, 4, 5, and 6, and teaching band. You know, across, you know, online platforms. In public school, we got to use Google Meets, which isn't ideal for music, but we make it work. And you know, that's been you know, certainly a challenge, and even just getting the kids to engage. And as part of, you know, as an urban educator, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not kids can engage and log in, or, you know, what's going on at home, and different things like that affect their ability, not just for me as a band teacher, but across the board. So it's been challenging, but, you know, as teachers, our job is to keep it positive and to focus on the positive. And that's really what this last, you know, 2.5 months, 3 months has been about, is, you know, keeping things as good as possible for the students. From a business standpoint, you know, we pivoted really quickly. Actually, within 4 days of shutting down, we were up and running with Zoom lessons. Private lessons is a whole different ball of wax, because private lessons, you have a lot of parent buy-in. And those parents are, like, literally, because they're paying for music lessons, so their kids are a lot more, you know, engaged, and folks are making sure they're logging in every week for their lesson. But we saw a, you know, 20% hit right off the bat. So we were seeing 500 students a week that second week in March, and by the third week in March, we were down to 400, and that's where we have stayed. Thankfully, it's not a bad number to be at. You know, my business has been able to stay relevant. It's been able to, you know, I've been able to keep the teachers' studios full and my employees' hours the same. But it's still, you know, it's a 20% hit. And we've ebbed and flowed over the last 2.5 months. Like, get up to like 415, and then we'll have some withdrawals. We're back down to like 390, and right now we're back around 400. So it's been tough. We just reopened this week. In phase 2/3, and lots of
2.5.
precautions. Yeah, 2.5. So lots of precautions in place. Teachers are doing lessons in person, which I think in the film industry, when you start doing classes and stuff again, same thing. But like, we have shower curtains hung in our lesson rooms, so the kids are on one side of a clear shower curtain, the parents are, or the teachers on the other.
Wow.
A ridiculous amount of hand sanitizer stations, more than probably we need. But it's my job is to make sure that the people that are coming in feel safe and feel comfortable knowing that we're doing everything that we can to keep them safe. So
Awesome.
and it also, as a business side of things, COVID-19 has added a lot of expenses, like buying masks for the people that don't come in with a mask, because we require that you wear them into the studio. Buying the hand sanitizer, buying the touchless hand sanitizer things. It's a lot of extra expense that I don't think anybody in the business accounted for. And unfortunately, for some of my small business colleagues, these types of things are going to put them under, and they're not going to come back from it. But like I said, I'm very grateful, very blessed to be, like I said, relevant and fairly okay, honestly.
And obviously it's great to have you here. And obviously one thing I've noticed, even within our own film industry, is that it doesn't impact everybody the same. Some people are shutting down, businesses are shutting down, particularly on the West Coast. As Kevin mentioned, things were a ghost town in New York, just non-activity. And others are finding a way to be nimble and pivot and keep the lights on. Reggie, you've been impacted by COVID. I just want to tell people a little bit about you. You're an innovative guitarist, fearlessly creative vocalist, an engaging storyteller whose concert performances are infused with joy. You've appeared in numerous music videos, produced 9 CDs, the latest ready to go. You are committed to music as community building vehicle. Your music shares insightful perspectives on issues of life, history, education, and human rights. In the spirit of your mentors, Pete Seeger and Dr. Bernice Johnson Regan, founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock, you continue to be a master song leader who loves to help people discover that they can make a difference at any age, wherever they may live. A leader in arts education, you've assembled teachers in service trainings tailored to K through 12 and colleges. Now, I know all of those places have been shut down. What's been COVID like for you since early March?
Well, the first thing is that I generally spend about 80% of my time in a year traveling on the road. And that's what my year was basically designed to do from now until December. I was on the road in Illinois and Iowa just before the COVID-19 crisis struck. Came home on March the 8th after a date in Buffalo, and I was home. Well, I've been home basically ever since, with one jaunt out last week to Michigan. And it has just completely closed down concerts, both in schools and at art centers. And I had 3 weeks at colleges, Ursinus College in Pennsylvania and a college in Maryland. And so basically all the performance work in terms of connection, being in the presence, has been shut down. At the same time, I got home and like a lot of my colleagues, had to really kind of ramp up on technology to be able to kind of meet the opportunity and the demand to do online programming, to do concerts online. Had to sort of shift the energy of making connections. So it's been a head spinner. I would say that for the most part, it was a tremendous shock at first, because so much of what I do really revolves around being in the room with people. And that's not just because I like big crowds. there's a thing that happens, and I think, my colleagues would agree, there's a thing that happens when human beings are in a room together, the vibrations, non-vocal cues. If I'm in a concert setting or in a classroom with, 30 or 400 students, there are things you can do or sense or shift that are hard to do over Zoom. Zoom is much more, like TV, you're sending energy out and you're not quite sure where it's hitting. So that was probably the biggest change for me. Not to mention the fact that with all those gigs gone, my income sort of slowed to a crawl. People have been very generous in some ways, both in contributing through donations to, PayPal sites, or some people just actually have sent me checks. There have been some of the schools and some of the churches that I work with, or synagogues, that actually have done Zoom programs. So we've done that as well. And it's, I think, as Bryan said, you really, we're all artists. So you understand that the job of an artist is to adapt. So I think we have, for the most part, my colleagues and I have been doing Zoom sessions and private conversations to kind of say, what are you doing? What are you finding? But, like last 2 weeks, I've been on 8 different platforms, and all of them have different protocols and volume settings. And so it gets a little maddening. Not to mention the fact that, this is, for what I do, a really exciting time to be alive because of the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and with all of the unrest and the demonstrations. So I'm checking in with all those things and then trying to do some outreach with different groups and individuals. So it's been a very fertile time. And then because I'm home, I've also been doing a lot of writing. So it has been a quiet time that was not scheduled, but I've written about 6 songs in this time. And I've got a CD ready to go now, and no studio to go record it in. So, so that's kind of where I'm sitting. Every day is kind of the same and kind of different. It's a real mixed bag.
Mm-hmm. Well, glad to have you here, Reg. And you mentioned the issue of race, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how that may have shaped your perspective on you, on your work today. And we've been friends for, since you sang at our wedding, even before then. So that's going a good 25, 28 years. And I've always enjoyed the different stories. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that with everyone who's tuning in.
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and went to the Philadelphia Public Schools. After a year in Atlanta, went to Temple University for about 3 years, and then worked in Head Start as an assistant director for 8 years. And in that time, I've been singing all my life. I grew up in a Black neighborhood in Philly, really tied to my church. We're 10, 12 blocks away from my house was the Zion Baptist Church, the Reverend Leon Sullivan, who was one of the first African Americans. I believe actually he was the first African American to be appointed to a corporate board. And he was leading protests when I was, 8, 9 years old against the Tasty Baking Company and other concerns in Philadelphia that wouldn't hire African Americans. So I grew up in that cauldron of civil rights, even though I wasn't really aware of all of the permutations at the time. It really did center me in a time that years later, when I began to, perform and tour as a musician, and I began to find ways to, I began to see around the country as I traveled just how all of that, the civil rights movement did not change things everywhere. And as we know, it hasn't really changed things to the point where we are all equal. So after starting out a career where I just really wanted to become rich and famous like all the famous musicians I saw, my travel really centered me in meeting people like Pete Seeger and Bernice Johnson Reagan and Tom Paxton and Harry Belafonte. My whole focus really began to shift. So for the last 35 or so years, I've been doing music with a message. And that message is to really connect people to the history of our country, to connect people to the tough job of, working on racism and prejudice, the civil rights, human rights, some work on the environment. Um, and I center that work with, all ages. So it's from kindergarten through the time when people just pass off. And it's been a very vibrant way to not only make a living, but to spend my life. And, in this time, seeing all of this window opening around the country and around the world, on one way, I'm like a lot of the civil rights leaders that say, we have to use everything that we have, all of our disciplines and all of our different skills to make contact with people in a way that makes this window more than others that have occurred. So I'm finding just a really fertile ground for using my music to make contact, to get people grounded in a sense of history and a sense of purpose.
And Bryan, for you, where did you grow up? Where did you first get influenced, your perspectives on race and your work in the urban centers?
I grew up about an hour south of Albany in a very rural area of Columbia County in New York. And race wasn't something I knew about growing up, but it wasn't something that was forefront of my mind. At a very small high school, we had a class of 85 graduating people. I think in my entire high school, at my time, there may have been 3 or 4 people of color in the whole high school. And race wasn't a thing. They were honestly, almost celebrity status in my high school. So it was, because they I guess they were in every sense of the word a minority. Those, they were very, very popular, very, everybody wanted to be friends. And so I wasn't really aware of the larger issues until probably college. And St. Rose, certainly opened my eyes to differences. And in my work there, I was involved in residence life at St. Rose as well. I'm sorry I'm going dark, guys. My battery operated light is
Oh, that's okay.
fading. But in terms of my growth, I guess, is when I started working in a urban school district and seeing a lot of disparity between the haves and the have-nots. Especially as a band teacher. Kids that learn a musical instrument, it's frankly an antiquated system, and frankly it's a almost hate to say it, but it's a system based on bias. It's to learn an instrument in school, you get a half an hour once a week in a group lesson to learn to play your instrument. And then the rest of that time, you're supposed to go home and practice and learn. And the kids with means, or the kids with 2 parents at home, they get to, they have folks there that say, go practice, or they set up an appropriate practice space for a kid to be in. But the kids that have challenges, maybe multi-generational households, or mom's working nights and dad's working days, and they get home from school, one parent's sleeping and the other parent, is, not, or they need to help with little brothers or sisters, or in some cases the walls are just too thin and the neighbors don't want to hear the practicing. Those kids are, much more up against it versus, what I guess your middle class or upper class families. I think I was telling you, Mike, I did so I took all the school days for the entire year this past year and mapped them all out. And the most common occurrence of days throughout the school year was Thursday. Happened to be Thursday this year. And assuming that I got to see a kid every single Thursday of the school year. They didn't forget their instrument. They weren't sick. I wasn't sick. There wasn't a state test. Any of those things. Assuming everything's equal. The longest amount of time that I got to teach a kid, a Thursday kid, was 17 and a half hours for the year as a band teacher. 17 and a half hours for a year. They get almost double that in math and reading every couple weeks. Because math and reading is an hour and a half every single day. So 70 and a half for a year. So the kids that are successful are the ones that can go home and be successful. So it's, kids that are high poverty and high trauma, they don't, we're putting them behind, for lack of better words, we're putting them behind the 8 ball before they even get started, because we're not giving them the instruction that they need in order to be successful learning to play an instrument.
So it's more, there's got to be more to it than just providing an instrument.
Yeah, I mean, it all, like all things, it comes down to money, because teaching kids every day, you need more staff, you need more time in the buildings. I could go on and on and on, but so I think, when we talk about music and children, and then we talk about race and children of color, we're not giving them a chance to be as successful, frankly, because a lot of the challenges that our poor communities face, especially in the urban setting.
Great, appreciate your perspective. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, and when did the idea of race and difference started to come into your awareness?
I grew up a number of places, but primarily in Albany and Arbor Hill. And it wasn't until growing up, I was never aware of being poor, nor was I aware that I lived in an impoverished neighborhood. I will still argue to this day that it wasn't back when I was a kid. But I don't think, I'm not sure if I experienced racism first or classism first. The two seem to cross back and forth really easily in my experiences as a kid. But one of the, I went to a school that I was one of very few people of color, specifically Black. And there was a huge difference between, well, the haves and have-nots. And it seemed as though I was one of maybe 1.5 have-nots that was at the school. So it was a huge culture shock for me. And I think that it was more classism that I experienced in those moments. But it was this exact same feeling as the racism that I continue to feel. Yeah. So back in high school, that I can recall.
As a filmmaker, I know you as the writer, director, actor of I Hate Being Black. Could you tell folks about that and why you created that, how that came
Absolutely. First and foremost, I absolutely love being Black. It's the title. It's the title. Please do not get it twisted.
Definitely grabbed my attention. It starts with a good title.
I've had debates over that title. So it was written. My co-star and I wrote it initially to help her get. She needed footage I introduced her to my then agent, and my agent liked her look, but she didn't have any footage. And I said, well, let's shoot something, give you some footage. So we had a conversation about what we wanted to shoot, and decided on that, wrote it, shot it. And I was adamant about the title, for shock value, but because of the debate that we have in the movie. A number of my friends advised me against it. A number of people advised me against it. I was at this writing get together with notable writers there out in LA, and I had a version of a draft of the edit on my computer, and I showed it to a few people, and they really liked it. They hated the title. I had this one guy say that he would fund a series of it, but I had to change the name, and well, the name has stuck. But yeah, so it was initially written to help a friend acquire footage for a reel, and the discussion, though, is a discussion that that I've had a number of times with other people of color. It took me by surprise, the response from my melanin challenged friends, that the majority of responses were like, "Oh my God, it's like being a fly on a wall to a Black conversation." But yeah, it's a reality. Not hating being Black, but what the conversation is about.
And what's been the success of the film? Has it hit film festivals, and where can people still see it?
It's been in a number of film festivals. It's won film festivals. It's had distribution on television through Badami Productions. The African American Shorts program. It's currently on Roku and Apple TV via Seed and Spark channel, and this coming Tuesday and next Saturday, I believe, it's on Magic Johnson's station, Spire TV. It's part of their A Day in a Life of, is it A Day in a Life of a Black Man? I can't recall what the title of this episode will be, but it'll be airing on the 23rd and the 27th on Aspire TV as well. So
Outstanding.
yeah, it's had some success.
It's great to hear about that, because that shows the legs of this program that you made, I think, a number of years ago, and it's kind of coming out at the right, it's there, it exists. So
yeah,
good for you, and wish you all the success with that.
Yeah.
Well,
It's so sad. Pardon?
I was going to say, if I can jump in for a minute,
Yeah.
Mike sent me the link to the trailer, and I love the title.
Well, thank you.
I watched the trailer. I love the trailer too. I can't wait to really get a chance to see the film. But it's a even with what I saw, it's a very powerful conversation, and it's certainly one that hits very close to my heart. Particularly when I was growing up in Philadelphia and going to progressively integrating schools and having that conversation a lot of times with myself.
Excellent. That's great. That's great that the work of art can actually continue that conversation. As you said, Reggie, you were having those conversations with yourself, and now we're able to have these conversations with others, which is a big part of your work. Deeper Than Skin, I think, is something that got halted by COVID. Could you tell folks a little bit about that work?
Well, about 5 years ago, my friend Greg Greenway, who's another singer-songwriter, grew up as a white kid in Richmond, Virginia. And my DNA comes from a plantation 25 miles north of Richmond, Virginia, a plantation called Hickory Hill. Greg and I met about 30 years ago as musicians and became friends. And the thing that really struck me about him was he was ready and willing to talk about race almost as soon as we met, and had already done some homework. He'd already been thinking about this as an artist who grew up in that cauldron of the Confederacy. And so 4 years ago, we launched a show called Deeper Than the Skin. It's largely a show about stories, narrative, and songs. Each of us have written songs that talk about our conversations and talk about our journey through figuring out how our separate narratives, we're born 3 days apart, and yet our narratives are very different because of our color and because of our background. So over the course of years, we've had any number of good, sometimes difficult discussions that formed our friendship. So the show has been touring around the country. It did grind to a halt. We had dates on the board to perform it, but now, as a matter of fact, tomorrow night we're going to be doing it on Zoom and Facebook Live, an online version of the show. Um, and that's been interesting to work out because it's a
Oh, excellent.
powerful presentation for the two of us standing on a stage in places like Mississippi and Louisiana, and also upstate New York and Connecticut and Maine, standing on stage, a black man and a white man talking about our beginnings, how we grew up, how we became friends, and then how race and prejudice in America has shaped our separate narratives and how we've worked to address that in our lives and in our music. So uh, it's kind of exciting to see an opportunity. We've done it once before online, and tomorrow night we'll perform that at 7:30 and extend this conversation that we've been having. And it's been remarkable. And it's been mostly white audiences that we've been able to perform it for. I think for a variety of reasons that we don't necessarily aren't able to really get into here. But the largest part is that a lot of what we're talking about in terms of things people don't know, a lot of black people know this stuff. The black community has been having this conversation with itself, and as I said, individually for years. So getting black folks to come out and commit themselves to a 2 hour program on race is a different conversation. Not that we haven't had mixed audiences, but I've seen a lot of white audiences in churches, a couple of synagogues and art centers on the campus of the University of Michigan, of Mississippi, Michigan as well. Um, and people just taking in a lot of stuff they don't know about the way our country was formed and why we are where we are. And we temper that with music because music is a great way to extend conversations and to also get people out of their heads and into a more heart zone. So,
Oh, and just to build on that, Reggie, a lot of what we try to do at the Northeast Filmmakers Lab is emphasize story and audience and how those two connect. And having the honor of filming Deeper Than Skin, it can, and I know how powerful that show and that dialogue that you have with Greg Greenway is, and he's truly passionate and so committed to sharing this with the audience. How can people join you tomorrow night, Friday night,
they can.
online?
They can check my website, reggieharrismusic.com. The link is over my Facebook page. The link is there as well. Um, and yeah, it's been a remarkable conversation leading up to this time when suddenly all the explosion of COVID-19 and the racial crisis of the murders happened. Um, so now, even though we're in COVID lockdown, we're getting a lot more connections and people requesting that we do the performance, which is one of the reasons that we'll launch it tomorrow night. So
Excellent. And that's where I want to go to next, is the murder of George Floyd. And Bryan, what was your first reaction to that, those incidents as you watched that? Oh, you're muted. Let's.
I am now unmuted.
There you go.
Shock, outrage, sadness. I think a lot, at no point do I feel that force like that should ever be used. And certainly, you know, not against people of color, not against anyone, but it was in my eyes is very clear, is very clear cut case, for lack of better words. And I'm no attorney or law enforcement person, but to have a man who was not struggling, and to see that officer with his knee on his neck, and to have that man ignore people saying, you know, he can't, you know, he can't breathe, he needs help, and to stay there even after the man lost consciousness, and even after the medics arrived, and after the man, you know, heartbreakingly, you know, like, you know, you hear about people calling out for their mamas, right? When, you know, it's like something out of like a World War II movie, like Saving Private Ryan, you know, as they're, you know that they're gonna die, you know. It's sort of a, you know, almost you know, cinematic thing, but to see and hear that in real life, you know, it breaks your heart. And you know, it's hard to put into words, honestly. And you know, it brings to light, you know, so many things that, you know, again, you know, I'll call on my race as a white male, like, you know, you hear about it, and, you know, there was outrage, and forgive me, I don't remember his name, but the man on Long Island that was selling cigarettes, that started the I Can't Breathe movement.
Right.
You know, you know, that was upsetting, but then it's sort of like the moment's there and then it's not. And I think that, you know, part of it being the technology, and the fact that people are able to catch these things and film it from different angles, and you can, you know, if you take it all in and you do your research, you can see it from every angle, and it just becomes even more outrageous and more unjustified, you know, and unacceptable. You know, there shouldn't have been any delay in holding those officers accountable. It should have been, you know, as soon as that man was on a gurney, and, you know, other police should have arrived and arrested the men that were there. I mean, they committed murder in broad daylight and felt okay doing it. And there's nothing about that that's okay.
Well said, Bryan, and thanks for taking us here. You know, as artists too, I was once told that we're kind of born differently, wired differently. We have different antennas. So when we see something, when we go to a movie, and Kevin, I don't know if this is, you know, you're, as an actor, you're taking in all kinds of different things in a scene from your partner. We feel on a different level. And so, what was it like for you, Kevin, to witness that, and what does it conjure up for you, and as a black man
It was, my initial thoughts were, damn, another one. And then it became anger and frustration at the fact that it has been somewhat sensationalized, because it just plays over and over and over again on television. And I think that there's a desensitizing that exacerbates the issue of why it happens anyway, through that kind of playing it over and over again. It's, you know, yeah, there are a number of things that bother me about it. I'm I love the movement right now. I love the energy in this movement. I pray that it continues, because it is having, you know, a profound effect right now. I hate that it took this long and so many deaths for people to start to listen, because, you know, this has been reported prior to cell phones capturing it. Yet, not enough people, I guess, believe it in order to make a change or care about it because it's not affecting them. So whatever prompted for everyone to be sick and tired, that put the energy behind this movement, thank God. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's hard to listen to a lot of the of my friends, some of my friends that I believe are earnestly expressing, their feelings about, the mistreatment of Black people, all these years or what have you. But there's, I can't even, I don't know how to voice it actually. Yeah, I don't know how to voice it.
Well, that's great. And, thank you for bringing us into this, because I'm learning different how this is affecting you. And that I think is helpful for our entire audience.
Mhm.
And in terms of people who have laid the foundation, one of, in getting us here to have this conversation is Reggie, because Reggie, you have been, we need to unmute you, but you've been on many marches from Selma, Alabama, to crossing the Pettus Bridge, to touring, bringing students to museums, your work, the Underground Railroad. What was going through your mind when you hear Kevin speak? What does that bring up for you?
Well, actually, hearing both Kevin and Bryan, this is a profound moment, and there have been so many moments, but in my heart, I believe that the opening, and not just because of the murders, because of the whole context that our nation has found itself in, because of the vulnerability that all people are feeling, because we've all been in lockdown and in whatever way that we have been. It's a very it is a difficult moment to put into words, and I've been encouraging my audiences and those people that have reached out to me, not to work so hard to put it in words. I've been encouraging them to sit with it. I've been encouraging people to feel the moment and not try to send it somewhere, because that's what generally happens. I think both of our guests have mentioned, these things happen, and then a couple of weeks go by and something else is up, and we put it in a compartment regardless of who we are. For me, there are, people reached out to me and they said, well, how do you feel? Well, I always feel this because I have so many experiences in so many states where that exact thing could have happened, including, 3 miles from my house in upstate New York. So hearing that story, in one sense, re-traumatizes me again, because it takes me back to those moments when I was in that place on the New Jersey Turnpike, or in, the neighborhood around Tulane in Louisiana, or wherever I was when I had that encounter that didn't go there, but could have. So that's, and part of the work that we're doing with Deeper Than the Skin is trying to use narrative to take people there. We don't dip them deeply in, but Greg talks about how he had to come to the realization that this has been happening to Black lives since about 1619. That's our nation's history. And there have been many films and many songs and many theater pieces, and that have portrayed that, broken it out, shown it. So in this moment, I'm really, because I feel there is a different fabric to what is happening in the nation, And the other interesting thing is that I was just on a Zoom call yesterday. My family started on a plantation in Ashland, Virginia, Hickory Hill. And it started because the master had 6 children by one of his slaves named Bibana. And through a series of incidents and accidents, I was able to meet the white side of the family in 2012. And we are now in touch with each other. And we talk often, the various siblings of the family of whom I'm a cousin. And yesterday we were on because our shared ancestor, Williams Carter Wickham, had a statue in Monroe Park in Richmond, Virginia. And we've been talking over the last few years since I've known them about what we are going to do about this statue, because it's not far away from the statues of Lee and Jefferson Davis and all of those. It's a lesser statue. He was a general. He was a Confederate general and state legislator and president of the C&O Railroad after the war. So he was prominent enough, and he owned 275 slaves. However, they had a statue up in Monroe Park, and on Tuesday night of last week, protesters attacked the statue and ripped it down.
So you had a conversation with your family members?
Yeah, we're talking about what our response is to that unceremonious toppling. We were, as a family, talking about trying to have the statue moved off public land. Demonstrate, and it was a lot of bureaucratic process going on for the last 4 years. The Monroe Park Association and other concerns in Richmond. And to make a long story short, it was going nowhere. And on Tuesday night, protesters said, enough of this, and they took it down. And interesting, the report in the Washington Post said they took it down, pulled it down, and somebody peed on it and ran away. This is history happening in the moment. But I'm on with my white cousins saying, all right, well, how do we feel about this, and how are we going to address this going forward? So we had about an hour and a half conversation yesterday. We've drafted a letter, and we were talking about where we're going to send it. And but we're also talking about what this is doing to our relationship and to the relationship of us as family, because we are. So this hits me very personally. They are coming now to grips with the fact that this new cousin that they have has been in these situations and could be again. And the reality of having somebody that I think the incident with George Floyd somehow in this moment has put a vibrant name on, as if all of the other people did not have names. But because of the way he died, because of the video, because of all those things, because of the moment in time, it has hit a spark, it has hit a core that I think gives us an opportunity. But I'm encouraging people not to rush to do something, because I don't know that we as a nation, in the various places that we live and our social locations are collectively ready to do something. I think we need to move toward doing something, and obviously people need to be arrested and charged and all of that. But individually, people need to do some soul searching, and they need to figure out where they sit in this soup. And then perhaps we can have the conversations that will move us out of this into some real action that is meaningful for our future.
That sounds very well thought out, Reg, and encouraging us to sit with things, perhaps have conversations like these, and really find out where we do stand with this. And Bryan, one of the reasons why I reached out to you is because I saw your post on Facebook about an incident you had with police recently, and I believe you registration expired. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because you also couch that under white privilege.
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I went back and forth as to whether or not I was going to make that post, because I know the can of worms that making a Facebook post can open. And that one certainly opened a can of worms.
It got you here. So
It got me here, and I'm honored to be in such amazing company. You know, so what happened was I was driving on I-88 highway home from Pennsylvania, and speeding 100%. And I also had a trailer that I was towing behind me. I had gotten some car parts for a hobby of mine. And I got pulled over by a state police officer, and he came over, and you know, he was, you know, very, very kind, very cordial, and you know, asked me if I knew why I got pulled over. I said, oh yeah, I'm assuming I was speeding. He's like, oh yeah, you were. You know, I was doing 87 in a 65, you know, on the highway, and
that's speeding, yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. You know, I wasn't passing cars, in my defense. I mean, I was moving with traffic, but anyway. But I had, just before he pulled me over, I'd been on the phone with my wife because I had left to make this little road trip at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I said I'd be home in the afternoon, and it was like 6 o'clock at night, and I still wasn't home yet. So I'd had a conversation. You know, my wife is amazing, and it wasn't like yelling at me, but you know, I told him, I was like, my wife was wondering where I was, where I've been, and he's like, oh yeah, I've been there. He's like, you know, well, give me your stuff, and he took the license and registration and came back and basically left me off with, you know, basically a warning, but also pointed, you know, he asked me when he came to my window if the trailer was registered because I didn't have the little sticker on the trailer. And I just responded, oh yeah. I was like, yeah, I said, I misplaced the sticker. I have to find it. And it ended. That was the extent of that conversation. So I was speeding at 87 in a 65, and I had an unregistered, to his eyes, trailer behind me. And I got off with a warning. And I have to acknowledge that is the definition of privilege. I had a conversation with some friends, and certainly my wife, about how that would have gone had I been a person of color. You know, pulled over with 2 violations, not 1, 2. You know, would I have been taken out of my car? Would my car have been searched? Would my car and trailer have been impounded because it wasn't registered the right way? You know, it could have gone in a myriad of directions, but it didn't. And the biggest thing for me with that, as I think about the students I teach, when I think about friends who are people of color, about my own kids' friends, I got kind of thinking about the fact that during that whole 10 or 15-minute exchange, I was never scared that something was going to happen. It didn't enter into my mind. I never once thought for a moment that this could go bad. I never thought for a moment that I would get pulled out of my car and patted down because he got me on 2 violations on an interstate highway. It never ever entered into my mind. And it was a moment, you know, of real understanding for me. I've accepted the term white privilege for a while. And I'll also be very honest to the people watching this that initially, and I think I started really hearing the term white. I mean, I've heard it a lot, you know, as an adult, but I initially took offense to it. Because somehow I felt that it made my own struggles and my own accomplishments somehow less, by acknowledging that perhaps it was easier for me because I'm a white male in America. And it took a while of listening and not listening. No, excuse me. Listening, not just hearing. There's a difference. There's a difference between hearing and listening. To really listening and understanding that that's not what the term white privilege means. And when I posted that post on Facebook, you know, I had, you know, and I guess with everything that you do on Facebook, you know, people flex their keyboard muscles, and friends that you wouldn't think had certain views end up shouting out their, from the safety of the computer, views that you strongly disagree with. And, some white friends saying, well, you shouldn't be ashamed because you're white. I'm like, it's not being ashamed. It's acknowledging that we have a systemic issue in this country. And yeah, in some ways things are easier for me because I'm white. They're going to be easier for my kids because they're white. Like I think about my kids, they have a diverse range of friends, which I'm really proud about. And when we talked about my two kids who are 9 and 11, almost 10 and 12 in another month, we're having these conversations, and we talked about how, like, the conversations that parents are having with their friends who are people of color are going to be very different than the conversations that we're having at home right now as white people. I can't imagine being a parent and being worried about, my child going out into the community and what might happen to them because they're a particular color. That's not something I've ever faced or something I probably will ever have to worry about because I happen to have white kids. And the understanding of what privilege means, and then also, again, kind of hard to say, but I feel like these conversations have to happen. Like for me personally, and I'm only coming from a personal spot, like my own racial bias, it's there. I have to acknowledge it because that's the only way to move past it. And an example that I gave was like if I'm, working downtown, and I see a black male walking down the street in a hoodie and maybe with his pants hanging real low, I get nervous. He might be the nicest guy in the world, might be just an amazing man, but my initial response is, all right, like just kind of like, walk a little taller and I get nervous. And that's a racial bias. There's nothing against that man. Could be the nicest guy in the world. But that's just something that is part of, I guess, my white male culture. I don't know what to say. Other than
Let me, I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to let our other guests sort of expound on what you've brought us into. So Kevin, I reached out to you after seeing your post with your encounters with police. You brought us through that, and I think you wrote a letter at that time. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, or if you wouldn't mind talking about what white privilege means to you. But I was moved by, not knowing you, but not knowing you, that you had gone through that experience with the police. So I'll just leave it open to if you'd like to share a little bit about that.
Well, I'll quickly summarize. Back in before the turn of the century, back in the 90s, I was pulled over at a routine traffic stop. Supposedly, but the way that I was pulled over was unconventional, at least for me. The cop, as I approached, I was coming into Harlem from the GW, and as I approached, I saw the officer in front, and he was doing like this, which to me means, well, what does it mean to you guys?
slow down.
Yeah, that's what I took it to mean. And I slowed down, and then he jumped in front of me with his gun drawn, and told me to roll down my windows and throw my hands on the dashboard, everything. It was it was quite frightening, all for a routine traffic stop. He said that it looked as though I was trying to run him over, and that he told me to stop. Anyway, yeah, I wrote a letter because I tried to, I made a formal complaint through the CCRB, Civilian Complaint Review Board, and unfortunately nothing happened. There, the blue wall of silence is what I was told then, while going back and forth with all of these meetings at the CCRB. But yeah, so I recalled that, I think I posted the actual letter to the press from back then, is what you were talking about, Mike. What does white privilege mean to me? White privilege is the fact that we are now seeing a plethora of commercials that are inclusive of Black people. White privilege is, well, what you described, you know, in getting stopped with the moving violations that you had with you, and going about, you know, your day. There's this great skit that Eddie Murphy did on SNL, where he puts on the makeup and goes out as a white man and discovers that like everything is free for him. He walks into the bank to try to get a loan and they just give him the money, and tries to pay for a newspaper, and it's like, what are you talking about? You know, and it's like, it's sad that that seems almost true. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I've had my share of luck and good fortune. Could count on two hands probably the white privilege that I've had. Two big zeros. Yeah, it's white privilege, white privilege. I mean, it's if I just had to show an image of what white privilege would be, it would just be our flag. Sadly, yeah. It's my solution to this. I made a joke about it, but then I thought, well, damn, that actually could be pretty cool. Is that yeah, everything should just reverse. Like instead of reparations, or as reparations, just reverse everything, and for 401 years, and yeah, see how that works.
I want to see that movie.
Yeah, right?
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing that. And you know, many people know you, love you up here in the upstate region, and I think they'd be floored to realize that that's what you experienced, and that's what many
Well, if I may
Black males
interject, it's
experience.
like it's a norm, which is even more. So my experience in watching the George Floyd, the images, and then the more recent Rashard Brooks, it brings me to tears. It's hard for me to sit and watch that and not just experience that pain, and then also watching the protests and the good that is finally being you know, the things that are finally being implemented and changed as a result of them. That also brings me to tears. It's like for the first time, we're finally getting an ear. I don't know if we're fully being heard yet, but we have an ear for sure, because things are, you know, change is happening. So yeah, it's been a very, very emotional time right now. Yeah, but again, it's like, it has been the norm. So it's like, well, it's just par for the course. I mean, I was taught growing up that I had to do twice as much work to be considered on level playing field with my melanin challenged counterparts. So if you grow up with that, you know, you're used to, you know, if you're used to carrying that burden, that load, yeah, it just becomes par for the course, unfortunately. So sadly, it's just been accepting things. But yeah, now it's like I get to a sense of relief, and that again, that an ear is finally, you know, pointed in the direction of my voice speaking. So
Thank you, Kevin. And, you know, part of why I wanted to have this conversation today, and I'm just grateful for the three of you guys to be on here, is I started getting emails from all the people, all the vendors, Verizon, We Stand with Black Lives Matter, all the different companies, whoever makes donuts, We Stand with Black Lives Matter. And you know, and it's not enough just to send a letter and say, that's where I stand. To me, what are you going to change? What are you going to change about your board composition? What are you going to change about how you hire? I just came out of Real Screen, which was now on Zoom for 3 days last week, which covers docuseries, reality TV shows, all the cooking shows, Tiger, whatever. And it was 5 white people after 5 white people after 5 white people. That's the people who make up the industry. And it was embarrassing because all of this was happening. And unless people commit to making the difference in the structure of who for our industry, in the hiring practices and the programming practices, there's really not, you know, I don't need an email to tell me that you stand someplace. I want people to take action. And so Reggie, being with you all these years and just having this conversation was, you know, what I had hoped that we would break the ice here today. And I don't know if you'd like to add any more on the idea of white privilege, Black Lives Matter, any of those things. I know we're over time, but if you guys have a few more minutes, and there's also a couple of questions, but just let me know if you do need to go.
Well, I'm honored to be here, and it is a sense of I don't know if it's relief, but it's certainly a breath of new air. And I really do appreciate, Mike, our relationship over the years. I know I call you up sometimes and I'll say, you know, I've got a new show at the school and I got to put together a quick video, and what can we do in, you know, 20 minutes?
Exactly right. That's great.
And it always takes 2 hours, so, you know, whatever. But one of the difficulties of white privilege, and I really appreciate you, Bryan, for the way you've articulated this, is that I think this gets pointed out often. Most white people think that it's about either individuality, being nice to Black people, or not being mean, or that it's an individual act. And white privilege is not about individual acts. It's about a system. It's about living inside a system. And the system is all encompassing. So that's why it's hard to see it, to recognize it. You know, it's the air white people breathe. You know, it's every president up until Barack Obama being white. You know, it's about all of those things. When I was young, I got injured playing something, and my mom took me to the hospital. And as we went into the hospital, we passed this big board where they had the trustees of the hospital and all the important people, you know, that, you know, controlled the hospital. And I just remember as a child seeing that board, and there were like 70 people on this board, you know, the board of directors, trustees, the surgeons, all that. And all in that, and this is the late 1950s, all of them were white. And, you know, that's how it was. So as far as I knew, I went to the hospital 2 years ago for a procedure, and I went into the hospital here in the Albany area, and I went by a board, and the board was almost the same. There were a couple of faces of color on there, but it was unchanged. You know, I'm 67 years old. You know, I mean, you would think, I mean, it's not that there aren't Black doctors. It's not that there weren't Black doctors in the 17 and 1800s, but they had to struggle to get there. And so that's the kind of thing we talk about. And yeah, I have the stories, being on the New Jersey Turnpike, and Kevin, God bless you, the cop on the New Jersey Turnpike who asked me to step out of the car, and I wasn't even driving. My blonde keyboard player was driving. He pulled us over, came up to my window and said, "I need you to get out of the car." And we went through the process. "Officer, what is the problem?" And eventually he told me that he noticed as we drove by that our eyes met and I looked at him funny. So that's where that conversation went. I ended up on the New Jersey Turnpike in front of my car with my hands on it. And I kept saying to him, I wasn't driving. So, at any rate. So the conversations that we're having really are about making systemic change. And that's why I'm encouraged by some of these corporations, but it's incumbent on them to change their boards and to change the way they do business. And I tell people all the time, if you're voting for a candidate, regardless of what party they are, who is supporting racist ideas, then you are supporting, racism and prejudice. If you are shopping or whatever we do as human beings to support this system and not require its change, continues the oppression. So, people, keep saying, well, what can I do? Well, it goes from the very smallest things that we do to obviously the big things of speaking out whenever we see racism. And of course, it comes into classism, and it comes into, gender issues, and it comes into really environmental, because there's a lot of issues in environmentalism that really contact people of color. So it's all those things. But I'm encouraged. I say these days that I'm cautiously hopeful, that we can have conversations like this and that they don't just stay here. I'm trying to have the work that I do uh, reflect, and I'm really blessed by the fact that a lot of the work is with young people. And so we have these conversations, and people think, oh, you can't talk about this with third and fourth graders. Oh, yes, you can. They are prepared and ready to have the conversation. And the more we talk to them about these issues, because for some of us who are older, we have issues with some of these, privilege and oppression uh, paradigms that they don't have, and they're not particularly willing to move in. I had a great conversation with my white cousin Clayton, who's 28 now, who has a white Southern kid, grew up, and he is struggling big time. He and his brother Will, and they are out every night in Richmond, Virginia. And their mother and father are freaking out because these boys are on it. They are like, we're bringing this down. So I'm encouraged by those kinds of actions, and by the multiplicity of faces that I see. We're having another movement here in upstate New York on Saturday. There's a group here called Rural Awakenings, and they are calling white people together because there ain't many of us people of color in my county. They're calling white people to come to the park in Cobleskill and show up and say Black Lives Matter and things must change. And 2 weeks ago, they had about 200 people out, and they're pounding away at it. So, we have a long way to go, but we always do. So that shouldn't shock anybody. But I'm cautiously hopeful that with all of us continuing to have the conversation, talking to our kids, talking to our neighbors, talking to our family members, even when it's difficult, even when they don't want to hear it, representing a way forward.
Yeah.
Thank you, Reg. We've got time perhaps for a couple questions. Perhaps I can direct this to Kevin. How do you think the film industry will change for the better or the worse during and post-COVID?
Well, it's affected me already. I thought that I'd be, super busy during this time. Keep myself busy. I write, shoot, direct, all of that. So, I have my own gear. So it's like, okay, well, I could just keep busy. Well, that's fine in working with myself. But if I'd like to incorporate other actors, specifically actors that are union, there lies the problem of not being able to get insurance, to get the SAG signatory, to to get the contract, to be able to make it, let alone acquiring locations. And so, yeah, so it's presented a problem. Just recently, the unions have put out their stipulations for going back to work, which, as you were alluding to earlier, Andy, and the expense of having to equip ourselves with all of the, the sanitizer and the masks and all of that. A production has to have all of those things in place. In addition to having had tests done, and each week you have to have tests done for all of your staff. So it is, it's putting a burden on the indie filmmaker. So I might start walking around with a like a GoFundMe like sticker or placard on my neck. Whenever I'm seen, you just know, all right, send money.
Awesome. Yeah, that is it has its challenges, right?
Yeah.
Here with independent film. Okay, got another question. Thank you, Kevin. From Tom. What is the difference from back then, when and where you grew up, to now regarding race and police brutality, and role does social media play in justice for individuals?
Is that to anyone in particular?
I'm gonna throw it out to Reg, if you're unmuted. You spend a lot of time on social media, and Bryan, if you'd like to comment on that too.
Well, what's the difference between then and now? We have cell phones. We can record, we can video, we can document. The same things that were going on in Mayor Rizzo's Philadelphia when I used to coach a basketball team at a church, and I would tell my team, which was all black, a half an hour earlier than I needed them to be there because we had a program in time to get stopped on the way to the game. So, I think that while a lot of the culture has actually intensified, with the militarization of police and the gulf that has developed over the course of years, we have made progress. I have, so many white friends who are, I won't say more outraged than me, but who are out there and literally risking their lives. I've had many friends who've been tear gassed, and they're back out there the next day. And we have social media. So I strategically, as you know, Mike, put things up. People respond to my posts, and we get in it, and I just say, come with respect. I get less and less people trying to, less and less supporters or anti demonstration people, or people who want to pound a point of view that is obviously clueless on my page, mostly because up until about 2016 in January, I had only blocked 9 people on Facebook, and now I'm up over 70. So, and I write to all of them and tell them why I'm blocking them, because I think dialogue's important. But, they get ugly and you get off my page. But if you have a point of view, I'm welcome. So I do that, and on Twitter. And so I'm trying to seed conversations and trying to find ways. I'm going to speak to a church group here in my town, actually in the next town over, in next week. And they called and said they don't have an opportunity to really talk to African Americans up close. This is a pretty homogenized area. So they said, would you come and talk to us? And we'll do it on Zoom. And I said, yeah. Stipulation: read White Fragility first as a group, and then and we'll talk. And they said, all right. So off we go. So I think the more we can do that, get people to make themselves aware. I say, the way to heal all of this is to make yourself more aware and more knowledgeable about what the problem is. And as a friend of mine said the other night, when I was meeting with a group for Southern Virginia, she said, I'm tired of educating white people on things that are easily found. So she said, I'm requiring all my groups to do some work before I'm willing to speak to them because these stories I have are precious for me, but they're hard to talk about. So I said, well, yeah. So I think, we have to find people who are willing to listen and then listen and share our stories thoughtfully.
Thank you, Reg. Um, if you guys have time for one last question, we call it the martini. Bryan, what's the best advice you've ever received regarding your career, musician, family? It could be anything.
Um, it's I don't know if it's advice. I feel like it's a fairly common saying that a lot of people have heard, but it's one that speaks to me a lot. It's if you're doing what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And that sums up my experience. It's I get asked a lot. I have the Gilder Music Academy, my business, and Scotia Music Academy. I mean, they're doing well, and
yeah.
I get asked by people on that side of my life, colleagues in those areas, like, why are you still a public school? Like, why are you doing this? I'll be honest. There are days. There are days. But at the end of the day, I like what I do. I like teaching kids. It's
Right.
and as an elementary band teacher, I mean, there's days where I swear if I hear hot cross buns one more time, I'm gonna take a drill to my ears. But but for that kid that learns that song, that's like a defining moment for them. Like every kid remembers the first time they played hot cross buns or Jingle Bells in like October, because why would we play it in December? It's
All right. So do you mind if I just cut in? Because I know I got to let you guys go, but I do want to hear from Kevin and Reg.
yeah,
Kevin,
you got it.
the best advice you've ever been given that you'd want to pass on to other artists, actors, filmmakers?
Nike has made a mint off of it. Just do it.
There you go. Okay.
Amen.
There you go. Things don't need to be, there it is. Reg?
I think one of mine was about collaboration. Someone told me, know your strengths and try never to do anything poorly that somebody else does well.
Love that. Love that. Love collaborating and love bringing in somebody who actually can do it better. And you guys did it great today. Thank you for helping articulate where we are, where each of you are. And I hope this helps all of our listeners out there. Bryan, Kevin, Reggie, thank you so much. Folks, we're going to wind down here. Thank you all. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to our co-producer, Eric Vollweiler, our publicist, Tammy Reese, and behind the scenes, student intern, a Great Dane from UAlbany, Luke Williams. If your business would like to sponsor future episodes, maybe you can't do it now, yet a year from now, you can donate at cinemaexchange.org/donate. Tune in next week with our guest, Dr. Diane Killian, founding director, work collaboratively. She can do that really well. So until then, folks, enjoy Josh Wine. Be well, stay healthy, stay connected. I'm Mike Camoin for Check the Gate. Our gate is good. Let's move on, people. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Love you guys. Thank you.
Be well.
Yep.